Excellent. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to another free educational webinar. My name is Dr. Emily or Dr. Splichal. I am a functional podiatrist. I am a human movement specialist. I'm the CEO and founder of EBFA Global and of Naboso, and I am passionate about the human foot and about human movement. And this is one that I actually dug up from the archives that I did in a little bit different way. This was years ago, probably 10 years ago. And I wanted to bring it back up and talk about how fascinating the human foot is and how it is perfect for walking. Now, a little bit on what inspired this webinar is that I was actually invited to go onto the show Expedition Bigfoot. And for that, they brought me on. They actually brought me on twice, which was awesome. The first time was to evaluate these imprints. Now, I don't know if I believe in Bigfoot. I don't know if I believe in Bigfoot. I've just never paid any mind to it. So I went into this completely just having done no research. I don't watch the show. I don't do any late night searching of Bigfoot. So I absolutely knew nothing about this. And then they sent me these imprints and these large footprints that were then casted, and they sent them to me, and then I did my assessment on them. And what was really, really interesting and part of why it was so much fun on the show is that I was able to geek out in the same way that I'm going to geek out today about this topic. And I was looking at different characteristics of the imprint and how human-like they were, which then allowed me to speak about this footprint. Whatever made this footprint was designed to ambulate very human-like. And this is how I was able to determine that based off of this type of footprint. And that's a little bit about what I want to share with you today. We're not going to be talking about Bigfoot. That's on the show Expedition Bigfoot. So stay tuned. It just premiered. So I think it's every Wednesday or Thursday evening on Discovery. All right. So here we go. The human foot is referred to as a plantigrade foot. So that's just something you want to know, is that when you see a foot, a human foot with these beautiful arches, I want you to think of it as that is plantigrade. Now, the human foot is very uniquely designed for bipedalism. And if you look at differences between a primate foot and a human foot, you can look at the differences in the foot structure, the footprints, if you were to assess them and know really a little bit about the way that the thing would be moving. And by looking at the human foot and these features of the human foot, I want you to understand why the human foot is just perfect for upright standing, bipedalism, which is what human gait is, and really what happens when we start to lose some of that foot posture, foot strength, foot positions, and how does that affect the way that we move? Because my other passion is movement longevity. So in order to walk optimally, to walk like a human walks, which is called bipedalism, that means we're walking on 2 feet. Bi means two feet. Bipedalism is that we are able to balance on one leg. So we can stand on one leg. That is a necessary position of a human to walk on 2 feet, is that we have to be able to stand on one leg. Now, the reason is that feeds into your second reason, this optimal step or stride length, is that to take long steps, you have to be able to balance on one foot. Okay, that's also what can predetermine or determine walking speed. And I have another webinar that I did about walking speed and longevity, and that if your walking speed starts to slow, it's actually a predictor to morbidity and mortality. So your goal for longevity is to keep walking, but to walk at a fast enough pace. In order to do that, you have to take long steps. In order to take long steps, you have to be able to stand on one leg. So now, the third requirement that makes humans very unique in how we move is that we are able to absorb impact forces, use it, store it as potential energy, and then release it as elastic energy. And I have webinars on that as well. If you look at my YouTube and you just search the term muscle tuning theory, that is one that I talk about this. Okay, now this absorption of the energy and releasing is really found within our fascial tissue, our connective tissue. So humans move in a very efficient way, which is very fascial. It's another requirement of human bipedalism. And then fourth, and probably my favorite, is that we have to be able to go somewhere. So human bipedalism is very characteristic around forward progression. And the way that we progress forward from a foot perspective is that the foot becomes a rigid lever. So understanding these four things for anyone who's listening, if you're a professional or if you are just an avid foot enthusiast and you want to optimize your foot function for longevity, you want to essentially train your foot to have awesome balance, single leg stance. You need to train your foot to absorb impact forces and to store it in your connective tissue. You do that through isometric contractions, which starts with the muscles in the bottom of the feet. And then 3, you have to train the foot to become a rigid lever. Those are the 3 things of how I look at training the foot for optimizing movement, performance, longevity, are those 3 things. Okay. All right. So if we think about human movement, human locomotion, human walking, okay, our goal, if we think about humans walking, is that we take long strides. So from a programming perspective, let's say you create programming for active agers, then you want to focus on walking, or a gait assessment is your client taking long steps? Okay. Same thing if you are just a consumer, an avid foot enthusiast, is think about how you walk, the quality of how you walk. These long strides, very important. We need to have optimal transfer of impact forces. Again, that occurs within your connective tissue and with minimal stress to the soft tissue system. Okay, that is essentially the optimized gait, is long strides, energy transfer, minimal stress to the system. Okay, now this is as opposed. So what I often do and what I did on this Bigfoot show is that I spoke about what makes human locomotion so unique, so fascinating. And then how does that obviously correlate to the foot? Then I said, well, I don't think that this thing, Bigfoot, this thing is a primate, because this is how a primate's foot structure is. This is what their imprints would look like. And this is how a primate moves. And then I was essentially just doing the differences. Okay. So we're going to just think about those differences because it helps you to appreciate the fascination of human locomotion when we just understand how do other animals ambulate, right? So primates are primarily quadrupedal, so hands and feet quadrupedal. However, a primate can stand up on their 2 feet, such as on this photo. So the primate is standing up on 2 feet, but you will notice certain key differences. First one is starting, if you actually look at the foot of this primate, instead of having a foot like a human foot, they have a foot that looks like a hand. So they have that opposable thumb, which is right here, which is going to affect, let's go back here, the rigid lever. So a primate's foot cannot achieve a rigid lever. They will never propulse or take step length like a human, because our foot with the big toe and essentially the MPJ lever allows us to do these things. So already that is going to be something that we're going to notice. A primate has shorter step or stride lengths. That means from an energy perspective, they're going to be less efficient. They will not walk as fast as a human just because of essentially straight physics, right? And then you can see that they're in this crouched position. So they're flexed at the hip, flexed at the knee, and it makes them just very inefficient. They're also then going to lean their body forward. So think about the way that a human moves when they start to really lose that joint range of motion. Like think someone who's like older and they're like hunched over, they have a kyphotic upper spine, maybe they've been sitting way too long and they're flexed. They don't have any sort of opening up of the pelvis. So we don't focus on it here, but in other courses I teach, I really focus on the rib cage and the pelvis and how it needs to open up and really get this awesome hip extension when you take long steps. And that's a necessary component of how humans move or walk as well. Okay, so these again, just some interesting differences. Right? I love to look at these interesting differences. Now, just for the fun of it, I want to look at some of maybe some similarities with a primate foot, and then again, some of these differences. So I just call these fascinating foot facts. Okay, so a primate foot and a human foot have all of the same bones, including the sesamoids. I find that fascinating, right? Flexion lines of a primate's foot match that of a newborn human baby. Fascinating. Foot arches, human foot arches, and I'm going to explain this even more. Human foot arches were developed during and for ambulation. So big difference between a primate's foot and a human foot is a human foot has these beautiful arches. Now, I will say that a child does not develop a mature arch or a foot arch until after the age of 7. So that's important to note. I see a lot of pediatric patients and the parents are curious about their flat feet and will they strengthen their arches? Will they get arches? So just use that as a marker if you do work with children or have children, that until the age of 7, your arch is still developing. Okay. Now, the only muscle that is in the primate and is not in all human feet is the plantaris. And I'll show you that muscle in a little bit. The only muscle that is in a human and not in a primate is peroneus tertius. And I'll show you that muscle and why that's important. The interossei, which I will show you as well, in the human foot shifts to be in between the metatarsals, which stabilizes the MPJs of your lever. Now, the interossei and how they shift and how they're different from a primate just further demonstrates that the human foot was designed to be a rigid lever. That's what we're going to leave it at. Okay. And then the flexor hallucis brevis, which is under here in the human, has 2 bellies in it. In a primate, it only has 1 belly. And it forms a conjoint tendon with the abductor hallucis, which connects to the posterior tibialis. If anyone has ever heard me do a lecture on short foot, that's really the muscles that I talk about is abductor hallucis, posterior tibialis, deep front fascia line connecting to the pelvic floor. Essentially, it's just more of a demonstration that the foot is developed for becoming a rigid lever. The purpose of the rigid lever is propulsion or for forward progression when we walk. So those are just some fun facts. Okay. Let's talk about the foot arches and why having foot arches are really a key component to optimizing the way that someone walks. Now, if someone does not have foot arches, maybe they have fallen arches, they have flat feet, they can still walk. They will still be able to walk. But here we're talking about optimized walk, right? Optimized gait and how that is linked to the foot. Okay, so we have these foot arches. We have a medial longitudinal arch, a lateral longitudinal arch, and then a transverse arch. Okay, now right here where my cursor is, that's your navicular. That's actually a bump right here. So if you feel your foot, there's a bump kind of right here. That is your navicular. The navicular is the highest point of the medial arch. And then on the outside of the foot, here, this is a bump, go just behind it and up. That's your cuboid bone. that is the highest point of your lateral arch, okay? Which is important. Again, I go into those a lot more in other conversations that I have, but just knowing that we have a medial, a lateral, a transverse, navicular position is really what you're referring to for the medial arch. Cuboid position is what we are describing for the lateral arch. And then the transverse arch is shaped by essentially coming off of the met heads. So we actually do not bear weight passively, like dead weight on the ball of our foot or the metatarsal heads. It's not the way that they're designed. And typically people who have metatarsalgia or ball of foot pain, they are dropped in that transverse arch or part of the transverse arch for a certain reason. Okay, now here, navicular height, this is our medial longitudinal arch. Here's our navicular bone, okay? And just what I wanted to show with the arches. So when I'm looking at an x-ray and kind of a foot, part of what creates the shape of the arch is this right here. So you can see that this is the heel bone. It's sitting like this, right? That's called calcaneal inclination. And then down here, we have coming down this way, we have metatarsal declination, and it is that combination of calcaneal inclination with metatarsal declination that creates the arch, okay? Now, part of the muscles that support this arch is going to be the balance or the dance between the anterior tibialis and the posterior tibialis. They are going to help bring stability to those structures, okay? Now, there are two functional reasons for having an arch. So if you were to look at a foot, a client's foot, your own foot, and say, okay, my arch is falling, why do I need arches in the first place? Outside of maybe the aesthetics and you like the way that an arch looks, right? We really want to focus on the function of the arches. So this is going to be towards your longitudinal arch first. First is arch compression. So here's your arch. Every time you walk, run, and jump, your foot starts to drop or widen. So that's arch compression. Makes sense, right? And as you compress your arch, you essentially pull and lengthen all of the fascia and the ligaments, the connective tissue in the bottom of the foot, including the plantar fascia, which is shown here in the photo. So the foot lengthens. It's lengthening. That's part of what's stretching that plantar fascia, but it's also widening. Okay, so it lengthens and widens as the arch compresses. That is essentially potentiating the connective tissue. It is what's putting the potential energy into the connective tissue. So when you pick up your foot, you're going to recoil like a rubber band and elastically release that energy. Okay, now studies have shown that you need more arch compression when you run than when you walk. Makes sense, right? Because it's faster, it's single leg, there's more acceleration, more forces, etc. So it's just something to know is that you need more the capacity to compress your arch more when you run than when you walk. Okay, some people do not have sufficient capacity to compress their arch. Maybe they have a really, really high arch with a really stiff plantar fascia. And then when they walk and they run, they then try to compress. And instead of getting that potentiation, they start to micro tear the plantar fascia. And now they get plantar fasciitis. Okay. Arch supports, custom orthotics block arch compression, especially custom orthotics that are hard. So they're hard plastic, is that if that shell does not compress, it is blocking arch compression. Now, is that good or is that bad? Honestly, it depends on the activity and the foot type and the injury history, but just thinking based off of natural design, you should want to have the arch compression. And if you block it with something rigid, you're kind of going against the natural function of the foot. Okay. I'm just going to leave it at that because there are some exceptions to every rule. Now, second reason for your foot arches is to become a rigid lever. A foot that does not have arches cannot become a rigid lever. Do they still move forward? Do they still propulse? Yes. But do they propulse as efficiently, as effectively as a foot with a beautiful rigid lever, such as this? So this is a very nice rigid lever. I mean, they're a little bit oblique here, but not bad, not bad. I would like to see a little bit more inversion here, but not bad, right? We're lifting here into that. Now that rigid lever, if you are assessing your client's capacity or your capacity to create a rigid lever, this is what you're looking at. When you do a single heel raise, and this is how you assess a rigid lever. I have my patients face away from me. They're near a wall. Their hands are by their side. They shift to stand on just their right leg. So now they're doing a right single leg balance. They stay standing on that leg for 10 seconds, put the hands onto the wall, stay on the right leg, and then just the right leg only. They're going to do a single heel raise as high as they can, and then come back down. And then let's do it like 3 or 4 times. And I have them do 3 or 4 single leg calf raises. Hands are on the wall, and that's essentially, I'm looking at their lever. Now, as they do that, and every time they lift into that lever, I'm looking to see that their heel inverts. The heel inverts into a nice locked rear foot. They're going straight across all of their metatarsal heads. They are connected through their digits. So one thing that this photo is showing here is that as this person is going into a heel raise, do you see their toes are contracting? So they've shortened the length of their digits and essentially their lever arm. That's not good. We want to keep our toes long, straight, and flat when you do a heel raise or you become a lever. So long digits straight across all 5 MPJs and a locked inverted heel or rear foot. That's what I'm looking for. Okay. So now what happens when we lose our arches? So we've lost our arches have fallen. What are we going to do and how do we ambulate? Well, yes, we can still walk, of course, but we are going to walk different. We are not going to walk as optimally as the humans, as we humans, are designed to walk. So a foot like this can still walk, but is not going to be able to walk with long steps, with optimal absorption of the potential energy and release of the elastic energy. They're not going to be able to walk with minimal stress to the connective tissue. They will eventually start to get some itis somewhere in the body, okay? Now this foot essentially looks like this on X-ray, which looks different than, if you humor me for a moment, here. Picture that, right? Do we see the calcaneal inclination, the metatarsal declination, right? Beautiful arch. And then we come back to here and you're like, what happened, right? The calcaneus is flat. It doesn't have an inclination. What? The metatarsals are flat. They don't have a declination. So we've completely flattened or lost the inclination declination of what creates stability in our foot. Huh. Interesting. So I like to share the way that a primate's foot would theoretically look on X-ray. So this is how a primate's foot, so let's say if it was the primate that we saw in the earlier slide, and they were standing flat and we took an X-ray, this is what it would look like, which looks like that, right? But then here, this is the human foot where we need arches. So a lot of the movement patterns of why a primate doesn't walk efficiently or optimally starts to become a little bit characteristic of this foot, right? It's just fascinating, fascinating. Okay, here is another example. So do you see how this person is flexing here? This is called sorry, you guys, a mid-tarsal break. So essentially the foot has folded and they push through there. This is called your mid-tarsal. This is the talus and this is the navicular. They flex right at that point. They flex right at that point. They're flexing right at that point. Crazy. And I see patients like this, right? This is just important because I talk about how walking and sufficient walking and the quality of how we walk, to me, is a key piece of living to be 120 and kind of this longevity space that is really, really popular right now. And Peter Attia has his book, and everyone's talking about longevity, right? Is a big component of that is if you want to live for, past 100, you have to be able to make sure that you are moving the right way to support that. Okay, so here, this is then a foot that is moving with a mid-tarsal break. They're going to not be able to lock the foot, so the foot is not stable. There's not going to be efficient energy transfer. They're going to get very fatigued. They will start to get injured, and they're going to have a low gear push off. Okay, so now maintaining an arch in the foot is very important. Now you can do this with arch supports, of course. You can do this by strengthening the foot muscles. Short foot exercise is one of the best. And then this exercise, which is the ball between the heel exercise, let me just get to where I'm actually showing it. This is one of my favorite exercises, where you are strengthening, let me get, again, my apologies, there's way too much talking in here. Okay, is that as I'm lifting my heels, every time I lift my heels and I drive my heels together, I'm squeezing them into the ball and I am activating the posterior tibialis. I'm strengthening the intrinsic muscles. I'm strengthening the glutes. So this is one of the best exercises to strengthen the rigid lever. So this is by far one of my favorite exercises. I actually consider this the king or queen of all short foots, because this is essentially a version or a progression of short foot. Okay, and you can find this on YouTube. It's just ball between heel exercise. Okay, now let's get into just a few more key features of what makes the human foot very, very unique and optimizes it for the way that we walk, right? For walking longevity. So here, this is the human foot. This is your first metatarsal into your big toe. Obviously, as you go into a lever, or if you look down at your foot as you're sitting in your chair or standing and you do a calf raise, the position that that foot is in right now is called a rigid lever. You can see that you are dorsiflexing your first MPJ or your big toe. So this is very important. Now, if you look at a primate's foot, they have a very similar structure from the bones that are present in the foot. However, their big toe is a thumb. So it's not optimized for becoming a rigid lever. They don't have a first MPJ in the same sense that we do. They have more of a thumb. So it's more of a hand than a foot with a first ray and a lever. Okay. So this first ray is really important. And I always like to look at the anatomy to understand how the anatomy keeps structure and stability in the foot. Now, in the human first ray, I'm going to show you how to move it just in case if you're not familiar. Here we go. And then I'll move back. Your first ray, which is your first metatarsal, I'm going to have you join me if you've never done this. And I'm grabbing metatarsals 2, 3, 4, 5 with my left hand on my left foot. My right hand is going to grab the first metatarsal, and then I'm going to move the first metatarsal up and down. And I'm literally just pushing it up, pushing it down, up and down. That's how your first metatarsal moves. Okay, similar to this photo. Now, every time the first metatarsal moves up and down, you can see it stays in this longitudinal pathway of the rest of the foot, right? And then if it continues forward, it's going to affect the big toe. So this first metatarsal up and down controls your big toe, which then also controls the lever or moving across all those MPJs, which is really, really important. So if we were to think of the anatomy here, and I'm going to show it to you over here, right here where my cursor is, that's your tibialis anterior inserting on top, okay? And if you look at your foot, see it, if you look at your foot and you dorsiflex it and invert it at the same time, you can see your tibialis anterior on front, the tendon jumping out. Okay, that's inserting right here where my cursor is. And then directly under that, directly under it on the bottom of the foot is your peroneus longus. And your peroneus longus is a very important muscle over here. Peroneus longus is coming around the outside of your foot. It goes under the foot, and then it's going to go across the bottom over here to the inside. Okay, it's running diagonally across the bottom of your foot. That tendon has essentially pulled that first metatarsal in line. Okay, so your peroneus longus shifts from pulling the thumb in like this to stabilizing the rigid lever. Fascinating, fascinating, right? So here, to have a balanced forefoot, this is your forefoot, a balanced forefoot, you need first ray stability. And first ray stability comes from your peroneus longus coming across this way, your tibialis anterior coming on top, and then your posterior tibialis comes down here and it inserts on this bump right here. And that bump is your navicular, remember? Your posterior tibialis lifts your arch. When we did that ball between the heel exercise, that was strengthening your arch and pulling that posterior tibialis to be stronger. Now, a fun fact, your posterior tibialis, which inserts here, fans out and it inserts all across the bottom of the foot, and it's actually going to insert onto your peroneus longus right around here. Okay, so that attachment point really, really important for ambulation. Okay, so peroneus longus coming here. Now, I did mention that there were a group of muscles, happen to be called interossei. These interossei, I'll show you my foot one last time. These interossei, here's your tendon, come off of your peroneus longus tendon like this. They actually originate on the peroneus longus tendon. I just find that so fascinating that a muscle originates on a tendon, and it's going to come up this way and it stabilizes the lever of your foot. Okay, those interossei, it's very unique to a human foot to have these interossei in between the metatarsals. So what happens to the human lever, the rigid lever and forward propulsion, if we have bunions, if we have hammer toes, right? What starts to happen to the way that we walk and the optimization of how we walk? Remember, that's really important. We want to walk optimally. So here are bunions, right? What I like to show when I talk about bunions, and I have a whole nother lecture just on bunions, so you could see if this is your first time hearing one of my webinars or you haven't listened to those other ones, this is one. Then you could listen to a bunion one, you could listen to a plantar fasciitis one, you could listen to these other ones, boom, 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 all different anatomy. There's so many webinars, so many rabbit holes you guys can go down. All right, here's a bunion. This starts to look like a primate foot. I find that really, really interesting. But here on the right, that is a bunion. So if you think of this right foot, picture that being what the X-ray is, okay? So we've lost this perfectly lined up first metatarsal big toe that we see here. Like that looks perfect for forward propulsion. Now we go here And that's now not as optimized for forward propulsion. So we want to understand that bunions essentially start to break the rigid lever and the ability for us to optimize our gait, right? So we start to push off of the side of our big toe like this. This is called a low gear push off. It is essentially an unlocked foot. It is insufficiently stable. That's the way that I want you to think of it, okay? Decreased energy transfer, energy leaks, okay? There will be stress to the soft tissue, eventually leading to some injury, okay? So for that, and to address that, this is where you could look at toe spacers such as the Naboso splay. Is the toe spacers are going to support a more aligned position of the digits so that when you walk and you push forward, you have a lined up MPJs, energy transfer, etc. Okay, now really, if you have a bunion or hammer toes, you want to be using toe spacers when you walk or when you do a majority of your walking, which is like day-to-day walking, which is why it's really best if you can use toe spacers in your shoes, because that's where the stress is happening, right? That's where we need to have the optimization of our lever is in the day-to-day walking, right? So that is always my recommendations for patients, is ideally if you could wear them in your shoes. Okay. All right. Now, as we start heading towards the end of the webinar, I have just a couple extra just cool facts about the foot, just additional reasons why the human foot is so designed for the movement in the way that it is. So here we go. And then if you guys have any questions, please type those in. And then again, just know that this is designed to get you intrigued. And then there's supportive webinars on some of the other topics that I was mentioning in here. Okay. All right. So we have, if you remember from in the beginning, I had said that the only muscle that is found in a human and not in a primate is the peroneus tertius. And this is where you find it. So most of your perineals are on the outside of your foot. Peroneus tertius is actually on the top of your foot. So it's part of your anterior compartment, not your lateral compartment. It is found, you'll have to move your foot a little bit dorsiflexed and everted to see the tendon pop out like on the image here, but it's going to insert onto the top of the base of your fifth metatarsal. So it's going to insert around here. Now, the purpose of your peroneus tertius is that it keeps your foot flat when you swing through. So as you pick up your foot to swing your leg forward, your foot should stay flat when you swing it forward. So it moves like this. If you did not have a peroneus tertius, when you picked up your foot, it would go like this. So you would essentially invert as you swing your leg through. Okay, so that is why we have a peroneus tertius, is that we ambulate and we need to make sure that we can pick up the foot flat so that we don't trip, right? So that's an important part. It opposes the inversion of tibialis anterior. So when you pick up your foot, you would essentially invert because your tibialis anterior is very strong. Peroneus tertius is opposing the tibialis anterior. Okay, all right. And then plantaris, I did mention this. So the plantaris is a muscle that all primates have and not every human has. Now, it is 3% the mass of the gastroc. And what's interesting is that it is primarily tendon or tendon sheath. It is packed with proprioceptors and nerve endings. So it's actually seen as more sensory tissue than a motor function. It doesn't carry the motor function anymore. It's more neurosensory is where I would put it. Obviously, it's harvested a lot for tendon transfers, but that is something that's very interesting. Now, the original insertion was in the bottom of the foot, to the bottom of the foot, that then shifted, and really the plantaris muscle, which comes down under here, is thought to have evolved into the human plantar fascia, which is interesting. And the plantar fascia is part of and continuous with your Achilles tendon, which the triceps surae, if you remember this, is formed by the gastrocnemius, the soleus, and the plantaris. So those three muscles come down, insert onto the calcaneus, the back of the calcaneus, wrap around the heel, and then become the plantar fascia. Okay, which leads into here. The last feature is that the human, so a primate's calcaneus is kind of like this, it's straight down. And if you look at the human calcaneus, it's actually like this. It's larger and it's pushed back into the Achilles tendon. And that elongation of the calcaneus pushing into the Achilles tendon is actually a extremely important component of the elastic energy return of the human Achilles. And there are research studies that will compare the energy transfer and just the unique physiology of the human Achilles tendon with kangaroos and kangaroo tendons. And essentially just showing that that is the power of elastic energy. And with the Olympics here, there's also, they're not here anymore, but with the Olympics and sprinters, it makes me think of the Achilles tendons. And there's actually research studies showing that people that have longer Achilles tendons are actually able to run faster or jump higher. And there are certain genetic propensities towards Achilles tendon length, which is just a really cool fact as it relates to human movement, and anatomy. So that is where we could say a human's Achilles tendon is very unique and just a demonstration that we are designed for efficient movement and to walk and to transfer energy repetitively, to potentiate our connective tissue. So again, they're just additional things that make human movement fascinating and how we could correlate that fascinating human movement with the foot. All right. Well, I hope that you guys enjoyed some of those fun facts about what makes a human foot unique, what makes a human foot perfect for bipedalism or for human locomotion, what happens when we start to lose that optimized foot posture or foot strength, and then what are just a couple things that we can do to maintain that optimal foot posture. And then please do know that I have many additional videos to support and kind of dive down those rabbit holes even more. So what I'm going to have you guys do is I am going to answer any questions that you guys have. If you can stick around for that, that is awesome. Please definitely do check out all the Instagram and the YouTube. This EBFA fitness one is where you will find a majority of my past webinars. And then Naboso has obviously Naboso product specific ones. So let me jump onto the questions real quick. Heath asks, what is an MPJ? MPJ is a metatarsal phalangeal joint. My apologies. That is essentially the knuckle of the foot. So when you flex forward or you do a calf raise and you look at the angle between the big toe and the foot, that's your MPJ, your metatarsal phalangeal joint that is bending. Okay. Let's see. Chris says, I have a hard time with dorsiflexion when I run. Don't know if it's what's called drop foot, but I feel like if I could fix this, I have less pain. If I'm correct, what can I do to correct this? So I actually did a lecture, not to guide you into and listen to another lecture, but I did a lecture that is all about the ankle. And that would be on this EBFA fitness one. I would definitely check that out because there's different reasons why we have limited ankle mobility. Some of it's bony, some of it's soft tissue, some of it is structural. So I would need to really guide you to understand really why do you have limited ankle dorsiflexion in the first place? And then yes, if you do address your ankle mobility, you can definitely address knee pain. Okay, Tia says, if you already have a bunion and have had it for a long time, are the spacers still a good idea? Will I totally correct or just prevent it from getting worse? Great question. Toe spacers and things for bunions are to essentially push pause on the bunion. You cannot reverse bunion without surgery. I do go into how you grade bunions, what really causes bunions. Hallux limitus is not the same as a hallux valgus, which is a bunion. So that's another lecture, which is on that same EBFA Fitness. Again, not to direct you to another video, but I just want to make sure that you get a fully in-depth answer. So Vita says, I bought a set of the toe spacers, but I have webbed toes. Yes, you can absolutely modify the toe spacers. I would essentially just cut out that center very carefully, cut out or release the center spacer and to see if that works. But we've had people with webbed toes use them. So you absolutely can. Okay, I have pain at the fifth metatarsal at the outside of my foot. My toe also curls under at times. What would you do to ease the pain? So it sounds like you may have a Taylor's bunion. So I would definitely check out the toe spacers at Naboso. That can help the curling of the fifth toe. Then depending if your pain is here or here, I always look at wider shoes, release the bottom of the foot, support the widening of the foot, which is called metatarsal splay. So I would get into the daily habit of releasing your feet so you can create balance around the lateral side of your foot. But most likely it's going to be related to a Taylor's bunion. Jay says, thank you for the webinar. You're very welcome, very interested. Did you talk about your arches or are falling? Can you do exercises to improve them? Second question is, do our feet appear to become longer as we age because our arches fall? Great question. So a flat foot is always a bigger foot. It will be longer and wider. So yes, if your arches are falling, your foot will become bigger. Your shoe size will become bigger. Now, I do have another lecture, not to direct you to another, and I really do not want to be annoying with that, but I did a whole lecture about different types of flat feet. So for that, Jay, and for anyone who's curious, I actually classify flat feet because not all flat feet are the same. So I classify them into, is it rigid or flexible? If it's flexible, is it muscle weakness or ligament laxity? And then depending on where you fall into this, can you use exercises to build an arch and you never need to use arch supports again? For that, I actually need to look at your foot. But essentially this lecture I go into and I show you how I begin to classify it. And then everyone here, you can assess your own foot and start to determine your foot type, which is great. Okay. So I'm going to do a couple more questions and then I know that many of you are still hanging on. Thank you so much. What are your thoughts on plyometrics to strengthen the foot? Plyometrics are great because they train the elasticity of the foot and we all need to move like rubber bands. So that is a good thing. How does peripheral neuropathy result in hypersensitivity of the feet? So guess what? I have another lecture on neuropathy. I have hundreds of lectures that are on YouTube. You guys have not guessed that by now. So neuropathy does not always mean numbness in your feet. Neuropathy could also mean an increase in an elevation in pain. So that is one of the most important distinctions. And then it's essentially navigating, are you presenting with allodynia, which is painful, more pain than you should have versus just numbness? Okay. Is there a way to strengthen your Achilles or make it more elastic post-rupture recovery? So yes, there is, you essentially slowly begin to create tensile strength and then elasticity strength in the Achilles tendon. A great place to start after surgery, because Mark is saying he just had surgery, is with isometrics. So you would start to do different isometric holds. You would essentially start to load your tendon up. They would be both seated and standing because you want to train the Achilles in both positions with your knee bent and your knee straight. So you hit the different muscles. So yeah, there's definitely some ways to do it. And I would I would kind of start there and then definitely inquire for more information if you would. You guys have awesome, awesome questions. If any of you are interested in doing a consultation, just because we're getting so many questions and I only have so much time, is right here, my website on the bottom. If you are ever wanting to do a virtual consultation, I do those. Actually, a majority of my patients are virtual. So please reach out there and I can absolutely set you up with that. Okay. Let's see if there's anyone, and I'm gonna answer 2 more questions, okay? Okay. So Helen says, how long should you wear toe spacers for? So we say start with 15 minutes, increase over time. If you have bunions or hammer toes, you actually want to wear them all day, every day in your shoes, if you can tolerate them, because you would need that. Can you strength train with the toe spacers on? Absolutely 100%, especially in the Naboso ones, because they're designed to stay on your toes. Do the 5-finger shoes work as well as toe spacers? Absolutely. I love the brand Peluva, Peluva, Peluva. They are awesome. That is what I use at the gym. Let me see. Chicken before the egg, upper body movement or feet, which affects what? Such a good question. That is where you really would want to be assessed for a bottom up or top down. And that's part of what I do with patients is I take them through and I try to assess and determine, is it bottom up or top down? But yes, chicken or egg thing is always something that we think about. Okay. Pam, last question. So she says, thank you for an enthusiastic glimpse at the fascinating foot. You're very welcome. Any insight to share about the Achilles tendinopathy? So similar to what I was saying with Mark, is that we need to really focus on both the isometric and the elastic. So a tensile strength and an elastic strength. And what really starts to happen is with age, people stop training the Achilles tendon to recoil. And I'm a huge believer of active ager baby boomers doing ballistic and plyometrics. They need to keep that elasticity in their connective tissue. And obviously we do this intelligently, but if you stay too in a bubble and too safe and you don't ever do anything jumping, then that's actually where you start to see Achilles tendon injuries and Achilles tendon ruptures, is because it just starts to kind of dehydrate. An Achilles tendon starts to degenerate from the inside out. It's called mucoid degeneration. It's like a jelly donut. The inside of the Achilles tendon is really, really weak and the tendon becomes fat. That is really a sign that that tendon is becoming weaker and degenerated. So hopefully that helps give a little bit of insight. If I did not answer your questions, then please do send me an email. My email is dremily@Naboso, dremily@EBFA Global. Essentially any of these handles, you will get to me. Dr. Emily Splichal, I have patient exercise videos. So if you go to that website, I have some at-home programs so you can strengthen your feet. There's actually a flat foot program within that, so you can keep those arches strong. So definitely do that. If you use code webinar, I'll make sure I send this in the email. If you use code webinar, it'll actually take $50 off of that little flat foot program. So you can totally use that. Otherwise, I want to thank you guys so much. The next webinar that I am doing, which if you're listening to the recording, don't know what time or month that will be, but the next one that I'm doing in September 2024 is going to be all about barefoot balance training. I'm going to take you through all my favorite balance hacks, how to challenge your balance, how to set your base. I'm just going to give you everything that you've ever wanted to know about balance training. And it's going to include a little workshop workout. You won't sweat, don't worry, workout, so that you can join me. So stay tuned for that. Thank you guys so much. I hope that you have a wonderful day or evening, depending where in the world you are. Thank you and good night or good day.